Hello, my name's Henry Rowan Daniel, and this is a YouTube show called Food for Your Mind, where I review fast food and books in tandem. Starting out today, easy, with the Wendy single, classic single, and The Shining by Stephen King. So without further delay, let's dig into this single. It's pretty good. Oh no. There's good crisp lettuce. Can't go wrong there. I do prefer Wendy's. If I'm gonna go hamburger, I definitely don't really want to go Burger King, don't really want to go McDonald's. Wendy's is the way to go. I apologize for my clumsy lamp, by the way. I'm gonna try to work on the decor of the set a little bit as time goes on. Just starting out here today. I'm making pretty short work of this, as you can see. Okay. Not bad on the whole. I think I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. I want to make sure everybody got a chance to see this cover up close, especially this lion down here. You can see he's very frowny. He seems very upset about something. All right, well, now that I've dispatched that Wendy single with all deliberate speed, you move on to The Shining. This is by one Stephen King, fairly obscure writer. You probably haven't heard of him before. But anyway, my basic take on this book is that this is supposed to be a working class nightmare. The rich exploit the poor, in so many words. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about one Stephen King. What is up with this guy? What's going on with him? Well, he's sold about 350 million books over the course of his career, so I guess that says something. At 2, his dad one day says, "I'm gonna go get a pack of cigarettes," and then abandons the family and never returns. So Stephen grows up on kind of the tougher end of things, I guess, as a young man. Has to kind of make his own way in the world. And you definitely see that at work when you read his books. He understands working class life very well, and he's also able to explain working class life in a way that middle class and other people can understand it. Also, interestingly, as a young boy, he saw a friend killed by a train and came home struck dumb by the situation. Wasn't able to even tell his family what happened, but apparently this did have a pretty big impact on him. Another seminal moment for one Stephen King, this is more beginning to be Stephen King the writer, comes when he finds H.P. Lovecraft, or rather not H.P. Lovecraft himself, but one of the books, up in his attic that his ne'er-do-well father had left behind. You can clearly see the Lovecraftianism in King generally, and in this book specifically. Most importantly, in terms of what we're going to be talking about for this book, growing up as, trying to work his way through college, things like that, Stephen King works as a janitor, he works as a gas pump attendant, and as a worker in an industrial laundry. So he knows whereof he speaks, indeed, in terms of the working class mores. Let's move on to talk about the writing a little bit. In short, it's mostly bad, I think. This is my favorite Stephen King book that I've ever read. I've read a couple others over the course of my life. I'm not really a big fan. But I've read it and The Stand, and I think I read Cujo. I usually thought of him as kind of a garbagey writer. But this book's a little bit better. His worst characteristics are still there, but they're a little more muted here. If I had to boil it down to a single word, what my problem with Stephen King is, it's cliche. Both in terms of what he's doing and how he's doing it. It's basically just cliche piled upon cliche piled upon cliche. First, let's talk about the what of this book. It's basically just the scary old house. It's a scary old hotel in this case, but it's the same kind of thing that you can get anywhere, basically. One thing that surprised me was that he actually mentions the 2 books that I thought kind of most ripped off, which were one, The Castle of Otranto, the original Gothic novel by Horace Walpole, and the other was The Haunting of Hill House, which we're actually going to read later on in the course of Food for Your Mind. A much better, I think, example of this genre. In terms of the how he does it and the sentence-by-sentence writing, it's mostly bad. Like I said, there's lots of cliches. Sometimes there are kind of original figures of speech, but they're usually sort of dumb. There was one that really jumped out at me. There's plenty of these, but this was the one that this is the most King in his most Kingian. Was describing Danny and Wendy and Jack all hanging out inside the hotel. Now everyone else is gone for the winter, and he writes, Inside its shell, the three of them went about their early evening routine like microbes trapped in the intestine of a monster. And, you know, the point of a horror novel really is that it's supposed to be scary. And I kind of started thinking to myself, is that scary? Is being a microbe trapped inside the intestine of a monster really that scary? If you're a microbe, you know, do you care what intestine you're in or not? I mean, you know, monsters are scary. We can all agree with that. But I mean, like, and so, I don't know, I find myself thinking about things like this and trying to figure out, like, exactly what is wrong with it. And because of that, I guess it takes me out of the book and I fail to be scared by it. His plotting is, you know, pretty good, but he gets stuck sometimes. He gets stuck, like, talking about alcoholism. It's a very serious subject, very often written about. If he had anything of interest to say about it, it might be interesting. But the problem is he usually doesn't really have much to say on the subjects of, say, alcoholism, child abuse, death and dying, etc. They're fine things to write about, but you gotta have something to say about them. At this point, I think I'd like to turn to my main thesis I'll be advancing, which is that this book is intended to represent the nightmare that the working class is exposed to in America. I don't really like the term working class because I feel like it blurs the issue and it misunderstands the complaints about being poor and about the rich being rich. Middle class people certainly work. Most wealthy people work. Almost everyone I know has a job. It's only a very, very few wealthiest people who don't actually have to work. Certainly being a doctor or a lawyer is work. I guess let's start with the title, The Shining. What is The Shining? Well, The Shining is actually a combination of two things. It's telepathy, it's the ability to read other people's minds, and it's precognition, which is the ability to predict the future. And these two things are kind of connected in a way that isn't really very obvious when you think about it. But we'll get more into that later. First, what I want to talk about is who has The Shining. First of all, Dick Hallorann has it. He, of course, if you've seen the movie, you know, he's the black cook who is leaving as the Torrance family is arriving at the Overlook Hotel. In fact, let's read a quote about describing one Dick Hallorann. The cook didn't conform to Wendy's image of the typical resort hotel kitchen personage at all. To begin with, such a personage was called a chef, nothing so mundane as a cook. Cooking was what she did in her apartment kitchen when she threw all the leftovers into a greased Pyrex casserole dish and added noodles. So, you can see there, it actually makes a point of how Dick Hallorann is not a chef. In addition to being working class, Dick Hallorann is also black into the bargain. Many times in books, black people do appear with magical powers. You may have heard the term magic Negro thrown around, or magical Negro thrown around. Dick Hallorann is certainly that. It's actually worth asking yourself, why is that so often true in our art, that black people seem to have magical powers? I guess the basic idea that is at work there is that suffering, especially unjustified suffering, leads to some kind of wisdom or insight or indeed even magical power. Similarly, blind people are often shown as having the ability to predict the future, or maybe, you know, albinos or people who have weird things about them or are in some way challenged, I suppose we'll say. They may have magical powers. So Dick Hallorann has The Shining. He's definitely a working class dude, and black. Danny Torrance, who is not just a working class person, but a working class child, come to understand over the course of the novel, and indeed even in real life, that it's not just society that can oppress people. Sometimes individuals, even individuals within your own family, may begin oppressing you. If it hasn't happened to you one day, it might. There are only a couple other people who have The Shining that Dick Hallorann mentions by name. One is a waitress and one is a maid. So everyone who is actually singled out as having The Shining in the novel is a working class person. Not all working class people have The Shining, like Wendy doesn't have it. It's one of those all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares type of thing. It's an open question as to whether Jack has The Shining or not. That's supposed to suggest the question to us: is Jack really being oppressed? Or, you know, he's 30-ish now, he's a grown man. Maybe it is his fault that he's, you know, working this crummy job at this haunted hotel. Certainly it's true that if any of our life is up to us, it's more up to us at 30 than it is at 5 or 10. I wanted to return to a point I started to make earlier about what is The Shining. It's actually a combination of two things. I watched the movie a dozen times and never quite picked up on this, but it is actually a combination of two things. It's telepathy, it's the ability to read other people's thoughts, and it's precognition, which the book actually defines as shining on. I guess the idea, or what we're supposed to take away from that, is that if you have the ability to know what other people are thinking, you can get more data, and with more data you can build a better model, and then you can have a better prediction. Both of these talents, telepathy and precognition, could be used to make money, curiously. Like if you could predict the stock market, for example, it would be very easy to make money. As a lawyer, for example, if you could read other people's minds, that would be helpful indeed. Is that all a coincidence? I don't really think so. I guess a reactionary take would be that The Shining is basically like pluck, or pull yourself up by your own bootstrapism. So you could read it that way. Let's move on to some of the middle-class characters in the novel. The middle-class characters all get no magical powers whatsoever. They don't get The Shining, and they don't get to live on as ghosts as the rich people seem to. Start with Watson, the guy who runs is in charge of the boiler and shows Jack how to work the boiler at the beginning of the novel. He was the on-season maintenance person who Jack is basically relieving for the winter. Watson is an interesting case in that he's not really a middle-class guy. He's downwardly mobile. His grandfather was responsible for building the hotel, I think, in fact. And it's only through basically his own kind of incompetence and idiocy that he's been reduced to the station he currently occupies. Again, he's not oppressed. He's not oppressed because he did this to himself. Therefore, he gets no magical powers. He does not get shining, as Danny and Dick Halloran do. There's also Stuart Ullman. He's the guy who interviews Jack at the opening of the movie, if you've only seen the movie, and also the book. He is supremely middle class. He's a middleman in every sense of the word. This is actually made much heavier in the book than in the movie. The book is much more class conscious and much more nakedly class conscious than the film is. Finally, you get the rich people in the novel. These rich people do get magical powers. They don't get The Shining, but they do get to live on as ghosts after they die, which of course is something, isn't it? Whenever you have really rich ghosts in any kind of book or movie or something, it's very appealing in a way because, well, you think that they got theirs in the end anyway, and of course they can't take it with them, you know, as the old saying goes. I guess the other point that is trying to make is that when very, very rich people die, not everything dies with them. That doesn't wipe the slate clean. Because obviously their kids are still alive and probably just as rich as they were. And the institutions that they built exist, likely still. Okay, I just want to provide a little textual evidence for my nascent theory, which I'm advancing here. This is Stuart Ullman describing the history of the Overlook Hotel to Jack during the interview at the beginning of the book. Ullman said, "The Overlook was built in the years 1907 to 1909. The closest town is Sidewinder, 40 miles east of here, over roads that are closed from sometime in late October and November until sometime in April. A man named Robert Townley Watson built it, the grandfather of our present maintenance man. Vanderbilts have stayed here, remember that name, and Rockefellers and Astors and DuPonts. 4 presidents have stayed in the presidential suite: Wilson, Harding, Roosevelt, and Nixon." Now let's move forward a bit. The narrator is describing the private school that Jack Torrance taught at, and then was fired from, before he got his job at the Overlook. The smell of hope had turned to the smell of old leather in Cromert's office, the whole thing like some scene from his own play, the old prints of previous Stovington headmasters. On their walls, steel engravings of the schools had been in 1879, when it was first built, And in 1895, when Vanderbilt money had enabled them to build a field house that still stood at the west end of the soccer field, squat, immense, dressed in ivory. Now, Stephen King is not the most thoughtful of writers, but it's very difficult for me to believe that that's an accident. I actually really think that that's on purpose, and what he's trying to show here is that the whole world is controlled by these very wealthy people, these very wealthy families. They haven't just built the hotel. They're not just in charge of this ghost world of the hotel. They're in charge of everything. It's in a way, it seems like they've conspired to lead the Torrance family up to this hotel where they can have their way with them. That's thinking about wealthy people kind of more as an aggregate. Let's talk about at least one wealthy person who appears in the novel specifically. The man who's in charge of, the man who's responsible for making the Overlook Hotel into what ultimately becomes Horace Derwent. So let's take a look at his description. Smiling bemusedly, Jack turned the page. Now he was looking at a full-page ad from the New York Sunday Times travel section. On the page after that, a story on Derwent himself, a balding man with eyes that pierced you even from an old newsprint photo. He was wearing rimless spectacles and a 40s-style pencil-thin mustache that did nothing at all to make him look like Errol Flynn. His face was that of an accountant. It was the eyes that made him look like someone and something else. Obviously, the eyes give him away. There's something up with this dude. The novel goes on to explain that Horace Derwent is the opposite of Watson, basically, in terms of class. He's upwardly mobile. He's born poor and becomes fantastically wealthy. Did he have the shining when he was poor? I think he did, actually. Let me ask you, ask yourself this question. What's harder, amassing a fortune for nothing or running a hotel? It seems to me fairly obvious that amassing a fortune for nothing is harder than running a hotel. And yet, why is it that Horace Derwent can amass a fortune from nothing, but can't actually make the hotel work, can't actually make it profitable, as the novel specifies many, many times? That is one of the more galling things I think about being a working class person, is you live in this world that is basically a playground for the super rich, and it doesn't even work as that very well. It doesn't even turn a profit. As I approach the end of my analysis here, I do want to point out one element that's in the book that doesn't appear in the movie at all. There's a very, very well integrated motif of wasps in the novel, which is not there in the film. Wasps that Jack deals with in the course of his work at the hotel, and also that appear on the dead people that they see towards the end of the novel, and also there are these wasp-like things that seem to kind of fly out of the hotel as it is burning at the end. I think the point that Stephen King's trying to make with the wasps is twofold. One is a very simple point. Working class jobs are harder than they seem. Sometimes people think that a job like being a caretaker is easy, and it is easy insofar as nothing goes wrong. But if something does go wrong, then things can get dicey because there is no one else to call. You have to take care of it. Another thing I think Stephen King is doing here is that wasps live in a little society, a little class society, sort of like people do. There's the queen and there's the drones and the workers. And though it is a society, it's kind of a cruel society. Excuse me. At the very least, it's a society that can be mobilized to do harm, given the right conditions. I'm going to read a final passage now in an attempt to buttress my argument one last time. This is from very late in the book, and Danny is talking to his imaginary friend Tony. Tony didn't answer, but Danny didn't need an answer. He knew a long and nightmarish masquerade party went on here, and had gone on for years. Little by little, a force had accrued, as secret and silent as interest in a bank account. Force, presence, shape, they were all only words, and none of them mattered. It wore many masks, but it was all one. Now, somewhere, it was coming for him. It was hiding behind Daddy's face, it was imitating Daddy's voice, it was wearing Daddy's clothes, but it was not his daddy. Well, alright, that is it for our first episode of Food for Your Mind. I am going to give Stephen King's The Shining a 6 out of 10. Okay. I did want to make one last point before I go. I forgot this, but I was talking to someone, speaking of scary books that are potentially scary, frightening in some way, maybe. I was talking to somebody, I won't say who, he's not going to see this, so he's not going to be offended. And this person said to me, I've never been scared by a book. I've never been scared. And by the way that he told me this, judging by the way that he told me this, he was very proud of this and seemed like he wanted a medal or something, or wanted me to be impressed or congratulate him. That's stupid. I guess I wanted to say, like, well, it's a shame that you've missed out on the experience of being scared while reading a book, because it's one of the more interesting ones you can have as a human being. And when you are put into a situation in real life that is scary, as eventually you will be, if you have had a little bit of experience being a little bit scared in a safe way previously, you may be able to stand up to that real fear better than people who haven't. So I guess my message to that individual, which I'm not going to name, is you may be scared enough before the end.